A question to the government.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call private and local bills for second reading?
Private and local bills for second reading. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 20, the Trustees of Liverpool United Baptist Church Act?
Bill number 20, Trustees of Liverpool United Baptist Church. The Honourable Member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 20, titled Trustees of the Liverpool United Baptist Church Act, be now read a second time.
All those in favour of the question say aye. Aye. All those against opposed say nay. Carried. The Honourable Clerk.
Bill number 20, an act to amend Chapter 132 of the Acts of 1948, an act to incorporate the Trustees of Liverpool United Baptist Church.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments on private and local bills. The Honourable Deputy Premier, Government House Leader.
Okay.
He's under a lot of pressure up there, Greg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Continuing with private and local bills for second reading, the Bill number 22, the Public Service Commission of Bridgewater Act.
Bill number 22, the Public Service Commission of Bridgewater Act. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that Bill number 22, Public Service Commission of Bridgewater Act, be now read a second time.
The question is for second reading of Bill number 22, the Public Service Commission of Bridgewater Act. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against say nay. Carried.
Bill number 22, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 59 of the Acts of 1993, an act respecting the Public Service Commission of Bridgewater.
Order the bill be referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Speaker, could you please call Bill number 38, the Yarmouth North Baptist Church Act?
Bill number 38, the Yarmouth North Baptist Church Act. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the member from Yarmouth, I move second reading of Bill 38.
The question is for second reading of Bill 38, Yarmouth North Baptist Church Act. Question, all those in favour say aye. All those opposed, carried.
Bill number 38, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 110 of the Acts of 1961, an act to incorporate Yarmouth North United Baptist Church of Yarmouth, Nova Scotia.
Order the bill be referred to the Committee on Private and Local Bills. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please now call public bills for second reading?
Public bills for second reading.
Could you please call Bill number 30, the Land Registration Act?
Bill number 30, the Land Registration Act. I will now call on the Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I now move that Bill 30 be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, this bill introduces amendments to the Registry Act and the Land Registration Act. These amendments will allow Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations some flexibility in how we choose to locate land registration and registry of deeds offices across the province. Right now, Mr. Speaker, the legislation requires us to have an office in each district or county across the province. And as a result, we have 18 combined land registration and registry of deed offices across the province, Mr. Speaker. This made sense before the internet, when someone had to line up at a registry of deeds office to let us know every time a property changed hands. But as you know, Mr. Speaker, the world is moving to online services, and we are no exception. Over 70% of all land records in Nova Scotia are accessible online. That means a real estate lawyer in Cape Breton can access land records in Yarmouth if they need to without having to leave their desk. And about 75% of all of our land registry filing is done online too. So, Mr. Speaker, it may make sense in the future for the department to be able to locate offices outside the county boundaries where they are now required by law to be. Other provinces in Atlantic Canada have far fewer land registry offices than we do. New Brunswick has the most, with 5. There is only 1 land registry office in all of Newfoundland and Labrador, and there are 2 in Prince Edward Island. Mr. Speaker, I should point out that this is an administrative change at this point. We do not have any plans to close or amalgamate any offices, but in the future, it may help us to deliver services more efficiently or to improve customer service. We need the flexibility to do that. There is also another technical amendment in this bill, Mr. Speaker, which will allow me to appoint deputy registrars of land titles to help our Registrar General perform his duties. Thank you, and I look forward to the interventions of other members.
The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This bill, I can only see one downfall with this bill that the minister's talking about, and otherwise I think it makes a lot of sense for the province. A couple of downfalls, actually. One of the concerns are, and the minister already talked about that, is the closure of some of these rural land registry offices. Indeed, would make it more difficult for someone to go to a land registry office if they so wish to do so in a rural area. And also the employment impact in a rural area where they have some very good jobs, that the government jobs that would be disappear and maybe go to another community. And as the minister is well aware, there's fewer and fewer jobs in rural Nova Scotia. So indeed that will over time probably cause a problem for some locations. Other locations it will probably make not much difference. If it just moved from one location in, say, Metro to another location, won't make any difference. So that is an issue. As you go through this act, I'm quite interested to see it go to law amendments to see what kind of information comes forward in that case. So those few words, we look forward to seeing the law amendments.
The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we also share the concern that our colleague from Preston has raised, the honourable member for Preston, and that is of potential job loss in rural parts of the province. I guess one of the points I'd make about that, Mr. Speaker, is oftentimes things seem to be centralized in more urban areas, and sometimes the service is being delivered, there's no real need for it to be centralized in an urban area. And I'd like to make the point for the government members of this legislature to keep that in mind, to be conscious of that going forward. If there's ways we can distribute some of the employment and government throughout the rural areas of the province, I think that's a good thing. And I think because those are the areas of the province that you're going to get more bang for your buck anyway. And we need to do what we can to try to keep an economy going throughout the entire province. Halifax here, of course, has a strong economy as it is, and it's easier for people to find work if they're displaced. I do respect, though, that in government times change. And I heard the comment that originally some of these registry of deeds offices had to be within about a day's horse ride, and for practical reasons years ago. And depending on the horse, as the honourable member suggested. So there may be some variance there, but times do change. And I guess what's important is that the service is being maintained and perhaps being given, people are being given even better access to the service. And that's good that government shows that it can change. And so we're pleased to support this. And I know that there's all kinds of opportunity for people to be, if they are displaced in the future, to find other opportunities in government. And I guess the point we'd like to highlight again is that hopefully this government is keeping in mind to try to make sure that there's opportunities continuing to happen in rural Nova Scotia throughout government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, it will be to close debate. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comments of the members opposite. It certainly would be our intention, I think, is through attrition and in whatever way, if it becomes the case that we close or combine offices or whatever. Well, I think basically to say if we reduce the number of offices, that we would like to take that concern around our employees, to heart. I do recognize the value, I think, of government jobs and as an employer in rural communities, and that certainly as the Minister of Agriculture, I think about that. And I was Minister of Natural Resources and also was aware. So I guess until I become Minister of Transportation, it's still a it's a thought, I think, that government keeps in mind. And I think also the thrust of this, and I think the thrust of any actions, legislation you see come from the government side of the House, it's about the people, and it's about the service for the people. And in a department that starts out its name as Service Nova Scotia, delivering a good service to the people of Nova Scotia at a very reasonable fee, I think, is what we'd like to do. And I recognize that members opposite certainly got their licks in on fee increases, so if we're able to hold those fees down and deliver good service, that's what we'd like to do. But we do keep in mind the potential for jobs and the people who could possibly lose jobs. And we're in no rush to be amalgamating offices or shutting down offices. But we do need the tool to allow us to do that, as the member for Inverness indicated, of the story of, within a horse ride of the offices had to be where you get in a horse ride in a day or a buggy ride. And actually, I'd heard that similar thing. Whether that's actually a fact, I'm not sure, but it makes a good story. But with today's technology, we can provide good service, actually better service, and I think members would probably be surprised to find out how little people actually walk through the doors of those offices. So with those comments, Mr. Speaker, I close debate and move second reading of Bill 30. Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The question is for second reading of Bill number 30. Is the House ready for the question? All in favour? Those opposed? The motion is carried.
Bill number 30, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2001, the Land Registration Act, and Chapter 392 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Registry Act.
Thank you. Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill number 33, the Court and Administrative Reform Act?
Thank you. I now call Bill number 33. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As Minister of Natural Resources, I'm pleased to move Bill number 33, an amendment to the Court and Administration Reform Act, to be read now for a second time. And Madam Speaker, it's my pleasure today to talk about Bill 33, an amendment to the Court and Administrative Reform Act. This legislation will allow the province to release ownership of some unacknowledged, ungranted Crown lands in a more timely and efficient manner. And the amendment of subsection 2 AA of the Court and Administrative Reform Act will assign to the Minister of Natural Resources the authority to issue certificates under the Land Titles Clarification Act. The authority is limited to parcels of less than 200 hectares, and the Minister already has been assigned this authority under the Crown Lands Act. This change further streamlines processes under the Land Titles Clarification Act, which were introduced and passed last fall by this government. These changes are making it possible for the Department of Natural Resources to clear up title to some 28,000 parcels of land around our province, consisting of more than 100,000 hectares, for which no Crown grants can be located. And these parcels are referred to as unacknowledged, ungranted lands. In 2005, when the Land Registration Act was implemented, it became necessary for the province to clear up its claim to ownership of this land. And although the land was never granted by the Crown, most of it has been used and occupied by Nova Scotians for many years. With the changes passed last year to provide a more streamlined and less costly way for government to release its ownership claim on unacknowledged and ungranted lands, prior complex, very time-consuming and costly title review has now been greatly improved. The amendment will complete the streamlining process by allowing the certificates of release to be issued in a quicker and more cost-effective manner. A focused effort is now underway within the department to make the recommendations on the Crown's ownership of these parcels by March 31st, 2013. Owners and occupiers of unacknowledged, ungranted land in the province expect quick determination of any outstanding Crown interest in the land. And where the Crown's interest has been relinquished or extinguished, they expect clear statements that the province will not assert its authority over that land. Certificates of release under the Land Titles Clarification Act can be issued once it's determined that through historic and current use, the province no longer has any ownership interest in these ungranted lands, which have never been surveyed or managed as Crown land. Implementation of a streamlined process for signing certificates of release for parcels less than 200 hectares in size will help to reduce the work involved in reconciling Crown's interest in these unacknowledged, ungranted lands. So, Madam Speaker, the amendment will result in effective time management and cost benefit for the Department of Natural Resources, which in turn will free up resources for other activities. It will not only provide efficiencies, but will reduce the paper burden and red tape within government. So finally, Madam Speaker, with this amendment, the province is continuing to deliver on its commitment to make life better for Nova Scotia families, and in this case, by eliminating a cumbersome process, clearing up land title issues, and reducing the cost of government programs. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and pleased to rise in my place today and speak briefly on the amendment introduced April 19th that will allow the province to release ownership of some ungranted Crown lands. And of course, in a more timely manner is what the goal and objective is of this amendment. The change will give the authority to the Natural Resources Minister to sign certificates of release for parcels of land less than 200 hectares. Now, the department has identified about 28,000 parcels of land consisting of more than 100,000 hectares in total. That's about 250,000 acres as acknowledged ungranted lands. And a focused effort is underway to make recommendations on the Crown's ownership of these parcels by March 31st, 2013. The certificates of release are issued once it is determined that through historic and current use, the province has lost interest in these ungranted lands which have never been surveyed or managed as Crown land. Now, most of this land is located in rural Nova Scotia, and I guess in many ways we can conclude that the bill is pretty basic motherhood legislation, and it will help streamline, as the minister has outlined, streamline the process of releasing small parcels of land, and it'll also help to reduce red tape, which again we definitely agree with. However, I guess perhaps small in some regards, there is the sidebar issue here that Nova Scotia already is a province with one of the smallest amounts of Crown land. Most land in Nova Scotia is privately owned, and this will in fact put more land in the hands of private ownership. While it is understandable government may want to get rid of some Crown land and help streamline the process of some small parcels, government still need to keep in mind the 12% goal of protected land, no matter how small and how incrementally we may move this process forward. And because we need to protect our lands for future and ensure that Nova Scotia meets the legislation laid out in the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act. So we do support the bill and its fastidiousness, but encourage government to obtain more land and meet the 12% goal. And with that, I thank you, Madam Speaker.
Excuse me. Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Argyll.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could I do an introduction before I get going here?
Certainly.
Thank you very much. Joining us in the West Gallery are two good friends of mine from the Pubnico region. They are, of course, representing the Musée Acadien des Pubnico, Bernice D'Entremont, as well as Pauline D'Entremont, just coming in to take in the activities of the House of Assembly.
Thank you very much, and I'd welcome all guests to the gallery today.
Thank you very much. Good name, though, and good last names, don't they? Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to say that our Progressive Conservative Caucus will support Bill number 33. This bill is indeed another step along the road to modernizing government. We in our caucus, as our leader has repeatedly stated, want to ensure that we have both a government and a legislature that meets the needs of the 21st century. Indeed, we have a bill before this House on that general subject. There have, I note, Madam Speaker, been a few problems lately with regard to traditional ownership of some properties. And while this is not an earth-shaking problem, it is one worthy of correction. So the government, we believe, is moving in the right direction in this area with this bill. It's just too bad that I can't say the government is moving in the right direction on bigger issues of concern for Nova Scotians today. As I understand it, Madam Speaker, the recent problem to be corrected by this legislature relate to traditional use and occupation of land. And sometimes there's a history of generations of use of land by individuals or families who thought they owned it or thought they had bought it from someone who owned it, when in fact the Crown, over the last couple of centuries, had never officially given up ownership, and the land has never been granted to anybody. Bill 33, Madam Speaker, responds to this sort of problem by allowing Cabinet to make regulations, assigning a specific minister to the right to issue, and under the Land Titles Clarification Act, a certificate of release of the Crown's interest in unregulated land in situations like those just referenced. Madam Speaker, I would hope that the minister gives his, given his right, would be the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations, because it is the department that now deals with other land registry issues. Another point that we'd like to make here has to do with regulations. Bill 33 only allows this type of problem to be resolved if the regulations establish policies and procedures for the issuance of that certificate. Regulations, Madam Speaker, regulations, the bane of everyone's existence, the red tape, more complications. In this regard, we in our caucus can only plead with the government to keep the regulations to a minimum and keep them simple so that folks can understand them. It is not the job of government to create billable hour opportunities for lawyers, but rather to reduce red tape and enable ordinary citizens to understand the rules. So in conclusion, while we support Bill 33 because it does tackle an outstanding problem, we strongly urge that the accompanying regulations be as simple, short, and understandable as is humanly possible, so folks affected by this sort of problem can understand how to deal with it. And thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I now recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I just thought I would come stand to say a few words on this matter. In Inverness County, we have a lot of old properties because there was whether it be the Acadian peoples, especially in the northern part of the county, or people who had come in the, I know some of my own ancestors who came in the early 1800s were granted tracts of land. And this has been an issue, and I can't help but think of one particular case that we were working on which years ago, which I can't help but wonder if it was the impetus for this piece of legislation. Because I can think of a family in particular who had a piece of land, but there was some question as to whether or not they owned it for a long, significant period of time, and at which point there was some dispute over who really owned the land. Did it belong to the people that it was originally granted to? So I just want to throw my support behind this bill, because if it is helping the process so that when we have these kinds of issues when they come to government, if it helps us to resolve them in a more efficient manner, Madam Speaker, I think that's a great thing, and I look forward to to the impacts that this piece of legislation is going to have for the people of Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you. If I'm to recognize the Honourable Minister of Natural Resources, it will be to close debate. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the support and the interventions of the members opposite. And in many ways, this is a housekeeping bill, but I think it's certainly the right direction that we're moving. So it'll make it easier for landowners that have properties that are in dispute or under the ungranted properties that are in our province. So with that, I just again thank the members, and I want to close debate here on Bill 33, and I'll move second reading of Bill 33.
Thank you. The question is for second reading of Bill number 33. Is the House ready for the question? Sorry. All in favour, say aye. Those opposed? The motion is carried.
Bill number 33, entitled an Act to amend Chapter 23 of the Acts of 1996, the Court and Administrative Reform Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill number 35, the Body Armour Control Act?
Okay, we'll now call Bill number 35. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy.
No.
I'm sorry, of Justice. Forgive me. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Madam Speaker. And I read this? Madam Speaker, I move that Bill number 35, Body Armour Control Act, be now read in a second time. This legislation was developed to deter those involved in criminal activity and make it safer for police to do their job. Believe it or not, Madam Speaker, it is very common for police to come in contact with criminals wearing body armour or bulletproof, stab-proof vests that they're commonly known as. I am sure that you have heard the news reports about incidents where those involved in criminal activity were wearing body armour. Madam Speaker, our police partners have noted that this practice is becoming more and more common. They are concerned, and we are, Madam Speaker, about the safety of their officers and the public. We can only assume, Madam Speaker, that people involved in criminal activity wearing body armour to protect themselves while pursuing criminal activities. This is not acceptable, Madam Speaker. With this legislation, it will be illegal for criminal and for anyone who does not have a permit to have body armour. Without regulation, the safety of both the police and the public is at risk. Madam Speaker, at this point in time, anyone who wishes to buy, sell, possess, or use body armour may do so. My department and our police partners want to ensure that only individuals who legitimately require the use of the body armour can possess it. It goes without saying, Madam Speaker, that there are many people who have to wear body armour to do their jobs. This legislation will not impact these individuals, Madam Speaker. Anyone required to wear body armour for their employment will be exempt. I am talking about police officers, sheriffs, correctional officers, armed guards, security guards, private investigators, and many, many others. Madam Speaker, to reiterate, under the proposed act, it will be illegal to possess body armour without a legitimate purpose. Anyone who possesses or sells body armour will be required to have a permit or a license. That means, Madam Speaker, that to enforce the act, we will create offences and prohibit and provide authorities to seize body armour that is possessed or sold illegally. It is important to point out that this legislation is not unique to Nova Scotia. There is a growing concern about the issue across Canada, Madam Speaker. In fact, going this route will bring us more in line with other provinces. British Columbia, Alberta, and Manitoba all have similar pieces of legislation. The British Columbia Act is the only one in force to date. It has been in effect for less than a year and is still quite new. But overall, results have been positive. Madam Speaker, I know that our policing partners are unanimously in favour of this legislation. When we introduced this bill on April 12th, the RCMP and Halifax Regional Police spoke in support of this legislation. Madam Speaker, I am confident that all other municipal police officers and agencies will support this bill number 35. We have also consulted with the body armour vendor in the province, and they understand the reasons for this legislation. They support the overall objectives of keeping body armour out of the hands of criminals and ensuring only those with legitimate purposes use the body armour. Madam Speaker, we are proposing a transition period before the legislation is proclaimed. This will give individuals and businesses who currently own or sell body armour time to attain the necessary permits and license. Madam Speaker, I hope that all members of this House can agree that adopting this legislation is a prudent and responsible thing to do to protect the safety of the police and the public in this province. It is one more tool that we can use to make our streets safer. And hopefully, Madam Speaker, it will make those individuals in criminal activities think twice. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
I now recognize the honourable member for Richmond.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a pleasure as the Liberal Justice critic to speak on Bill number 35, an act respecting the control of body armour. Now, I have numerous comments to make in respect to this bill and the fact that it deals with justice issues. Certainly a number of items to raise on that as well. Madam Speaker, the intent that's been presented by the Minister of Justice to keep body armour out of the hands of criminals is certainly one that all members of the House would support, and I'm sure Nova Scotians would support. I guess one of the first questions is, how big of a problem is this? And the challenge is when you have a Minister of Justice who stands in his place and says that police routinely run into situations where criminals are wearing body armour. It would be very helpful for us as legislators if you could provide some information to back that up. Did it happen once? Did it happen twice? Did it happen a dozen times, 100 times, 1,000 times? To be asked to pass legislation to deal with a problem that we don't fully understand how prevalent the problem it is makes it difficult for us as legislators. And today hasn't been a really good day for the Minister of Justice in providing information to this House. Just earlier, I did receive a letter from him relating to questions about cuts to restorative justice and anti-crime initiatives in his department, and rather than provide us with the details, he once again just provided budget numbers and refused to say the exact programs that were no longer going to be funded or whose funding had expired. And I'm left to ask why. Why would you not provide that? It's not just to provide to me, that's Nova Scotians' money, and they have a right to know where their money is going to be spent or where their money will not be spent. And why the Minister of Justice refuses to give that information is a mystery to me. Is there some programs there that he's embarrassed to not be funding anymore? Is that why? And regardless, whether he's embarrassed or not, this is Nova Scotians' money. It shouldn't be up to the Minister of Justice to decide what information Nova Scotians receive and what information they don't receive. So in case he was wondering whether I was satisfied with his response today, let me make it very clear. No, I'm not satisfied at all. And I think it's disrespectful to me and disrespectful to this chamber that the Minister of Justice asked for specific information, would not provide it. And I can't see why he continues to hide that information. So today, to stand in his place and suggest that we support legislation to deal with a problem that he's unable or unwilling to give us actual information on is again unfortunate. Because this is an issue where, as I mentioned before, preventing criminals from having body armour is something Nova Scotians don't have a problem with. But I can tell you from some of the feedback I've received through emails and letters, there's a segment of Nova Scotians that really see this as Big Brother telling them how they can protect themselves. The other issue with that is that, as the saying goes, the devil's in the details. Well, in this case, the devil's in the regulations, and we haven't seen them. Because those who have emailed me and said, well, what criteria will be used to determine who can have a permit to purchase and maintain body armour, I can't answer that because it's in the regulations. And guess what? They're not here. We haven't seen them. Maybe the Minister of Justice, and certainly being respectful of members of the House of Assembly, might be able to show us the regulations so that those who have asked exactly who will be permitted, other than those already prescribed in the bill. If an average Nova Scotian feels that his safety is threatened and that he wishes to purchase body armor, what exactly will the regulations say as to who will be approved and who will not be approved? Today, I can't answer that. I would submit to you, Madam Speaker, that the Minister of Justice can't answer that. Yet we're asked to support a bill, and the Minister masks it under safety for our police. Nobody would oppose initiatives to make the streets safer for our police and law enforcement officials. But again, this is a bill that tells Nova Scotians that it's the government, through a registrar, that will determine which Nova Scotians are permitted to protect themselves with body armor and which ones cannot. The other argument that's been raised with me is that while the Minister does talk about sellers in this province of body armor, he's indicated that they support this bill. It would really be nice to see a letter from them or some confirmation that that's true, other than just the Minister saying that they support it. We haven't seen that. But the question's been raised with me is that what's to stop people from purchasing body armor over the internet? More and more Nova Scotians are buying items from their home computer. They're not going out to a store. They're not going out to an army surplus. And in Nova Scotia, they're not going to public auctions held by Transportation Infrastructure Renewal either, where apparently, not long ago, you could actually buy body armor, compliments of the government of Nova Scotia. I'll get back to that in a minute. Most now are buying over the internet. So what protections does the Minister plan on putting in place to somehow control the purchase of body armor through the internet where it gets delivered at people's doorsteps? Has the Minister talked to Canadian border officials to tell them we'd like your support, because once this bill is passed, and I believe the Minister indicated that there's going to be a transition period, but once the transition period is ended, will he be informing federal officials with Canadian Border Services that any items of body armor destined for Nova Scotia purchased over the internet or through other means, that they'll have to check with the registrar now to make sure that it's actually going to someone legitimate and that it's not going into the hands of criminals or the hands of Nova Scotians who have not obtained the necessary permit to be able to have body armor. So we were curious as to who would be under the list of exemptions. And when the Minister brought in this bill, one would think, first thing he would have said is there anything that's been done by the government regarding the purchase or sale of body armor that may cause us some embarrassment before I bring this bill in? Because regardless of what may have done by previous administrations, civil servants are the same. They survive elections. They continue to operate, even if governments change. And one would have thought the first thing this government would have said is, we want to introduce legislation regulating body armor. Is there anything that we have done as a government that may cause some concerns in the purchasing or sale of body armor? Instead, I would submit that was not done. So lo and behold, we have to go through the embarrassment of reading the papers and finding out that some time ago, not long ago, the government of Nova Scotia, through a public auction put on by the Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, put up a lot of 7 bulletproof vests for public sale. So we found that out, and then it happens, Madam Speaker, that the person who bought the 7 units of body armor from the government had them stolen. So right now, they're in the hands of Nova Scotians who obviously, quite potentially I should say, do not have a permit to have these bulletproof vests. I would be curious is when the police have come across criminals, have they come across any of these vests previously owned by the province of Nova Scotia? We know there are 7 out there. Has the government been keeping track of which ones that they may have been able to repossess? Or are those 7 still out there? And are those 7 considered to be illegal when the individual who first bought them bought them from the government of Nova Scotia. You know, Madam Speaker, at a time when Nova Scotians are looking for confidence in our justice system, with the rash of violent crime that has taken place, to see that this kind of an embarrassing situation, that a government that wants to limit body armor forgot to ask, did we ever sell body armor as a province? Which we did. That certainly doesn't send confidence to Nova Scotians. And we spent the last few weeks trying to get the Minister of Justice to acknowledge there is a problem with crime, violent crime, here in this province. And to date, the Minister has refused to acknowledge there is that problem. Instead, he has made personal attacks against me and my colleagues for suggesting there has been an increase in violent crime and that something needs to be done. And we need to work together to address that. Yet today, when he tabled his letter to Mayor Peter Kelly, he acknowledged in the letter that there has been an escalation of violent crime in Metro and that he offered to work with the city to address the problem. So which one is it? Do we have a problem of violent crime in the province in the eyes of the Minister of Justice, or is this just something that the opposition is making up and that Nova Scotians shouldn't be concerned about? Shootings and stabbings and murders. We don't really know what to believe from the Minister of Justice anymore. And then when we see the Minister of Finance saying he's going to balance the books by cutting $5.3 million from the justice budget, as I said in the press, many Nova Scotians are of the belief that the NDP as a party have been soft on crime and that crime has never been a main priority for this party. And when you look at what's happened in the last few weeks, actions speak louder than words, and it certainly seems to be the case that justice is not a top priority for this government. It really isn't. The only one who still thinks it is the Minister of Justice, yet once again, he's unable to point to specific initiatives, new initiatives, to deal with rising crime in this province, and instead, unfortunately, and I say it again, I don't blame the Minister of Justice. Unfortunately, he was ordered by the Minister of Finance to cut $5.3 million from his department, yet he's the one who must answer for it. And I know deep down that when I'm asking him questions, he wishes to just point over with his right hand and say it's his fault, the Minister of Finance. And so be it. I don't sit around the cabinet table, but we would have expected if a party really did take crime seriously, they may have reinvested in education and not made $5.3 million in cuts. So today we're being asked to support a bill to limit body armor in this province. The regulations haven't been presented to us. We really have no sense of how serious a problem this is, other than the few media stories that have made mention that those who were arrested or those who were the victims of a crime were wearing body armor. I think it would be very useful to have some stats. I'm assuming the Halifax Regional Police would have access to that. I'm assuming as a result the Minister of Justice would have that information. And I think it would be very useful if you could stand in this House and tell us exactly how prevalent is this? And how quick should we be passing this legislation if it is as big of a problem as has been suggested? I'm not saying it's not a problem, but I'm left here just to take the Minister of Justice's word when he says it is a significant problem, yet he doesn't provide us with any figures and he doesn't provide us with any regulations. So tomorrow when I go back and look at my emails and the individuals who've emailed me asking for details on will I be able, as a law-abiding citizen who's concerned about his safety, will I be able to register and get a permit to purchase body armor? I can't answer that. Instead, all I can say is it'll be in the regulations. We haven't seen them. I'd almost suggest the Minister of Justice hasn't seen them, and that'll be done later. When the NDP party and the Minister of Finance sat on this side of the House, they would have lamented that very situation, and they would have asked to see the regulations before passing such a bill. When you look inside here at the bill itself, when it talks about the registrar and the process for obtaining a permit, it keeps making reference to as prescribed by regulation, which we haven't seen, as I've mentioned on a couple of occasions. So that's what makes this bill a challenge. Are there any other professions out there that are currently not included in this legislation that should be? What consultation took place by the Minister of Justice Was there an opportunity for people to make comment on the issue of body armor and placing limits on it? I don't recall seeing anything. I don't recall seeing a feedback site on the Department of Justice site. I don't remember a discussion paper. I don't even remember a press release asking for Nova Scotians' feedback. Instead, this is something that's being put forward by the Minister of Justice. I assume it's with the intention of looking like he's getting tough on crime after he's had $5.3 million cut from his budget, almost $500,000 cut from anti-crime and restorative justice initiatives. This bill hopefully will try to convince Nova Scotians they are getting tough on crime. Certainly, I believe most Nova Scotians who have been following debate in this chamber and following the media will not come to that conclusion and are still waiting for some answers from the Minister of Justice of exactly what cuts have been made. Today, for example, I raised the issue of cuts not only to legal aid, but on parenting assessments. And when I've listened to the Minister of Community Services, for example, talk about investments that they have made for the poor, it was ironic to watch her expressions today to learn that this cut is actually aimed directly at poor Nova Scotia families. Nova Scotia families of very limited income are now being told, because the province is picking up the tab for you, you can only pay $6,000 to have an assessment done to determine what's in your child's best interest. You know, I don't think that's the type of cut that's supported by the member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley. I don't think that's something that he would support, of saying to Nova Scotia families, because you are of limited financial means, this government's going to limit who you can go and get an assessment done by, or how much you can pay, and that after $6,000, you're cut off. What message does that send to the Nova Scotia families of limited income? Cutting $500,000 from legal aid, who does that hurt? Not the middle class, not the well-to-do families. Hurts the poor. It tells the poor their chances of getting legal aid has just become that much more difficult. And as well, the members, a member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley and others, are the ones who are forced to go out and justify a 2% increase in every user fee in the province. That the Minister of Finance has yet to justify in this House, but he says it's a cost of living increase. Okay, why not put a cost of living increase on who qualifies for legal aid? That wasn't done. So it was important enough to do it on services that Nova Scotians have no choice but to pay for. It's not like when you renew your driver's license, you can say, no, I'm going to go to New Brunswick and get it done there. It's a better deal. You have no choice. You have to pay what the government tells you is the going rate. Yet when they had a chance to say, well, not only are we increasing fees, we're also going to increase program cap limits, especially those that affect the poor, such as legal aid, such as parenting assessments. Or maybe the Minister of Community Services could have told us that they've increased the caps on housing grants. None of those were touched by this government. So user fees could be increased, but the caps that are placed on programs to help the poor in Nova Scotia remain in place. No changes made there. So that's the message that's being sent by the Department of Justice and by this government. And I sincerely believe that many members, especially the backbenchers, had no idea that this was being done. We always thought the reason why the government didn't want the Department of Justice estimates to be called when we asked for them to be called was because there was other information that they didn't want to be out there. Certain information respecting the Premier that did not want that embarrassment. But when we look at the budget and the $5.3 million cuts, it now appears there was another reason they didn't want the estimates to be looked at. Because we had 50 minutes to examine the Department of Justice budget. 50 minutes. But I will give credit where credit is due. The Minister of Justice could easily have used that 50 minutes to give an opening statement and not allowed one question to be asked. He could have done that. In fact, many of his colleagues chose to do that during their estimates. An old trick done by previous governments. But for those on the government side who thought this government would be different, not really. They're not different. The same tricks that were done by previous governments. Minister gives a big opening statement, 1 hour limit, then gives big long answers, unless you request the minister to give you short answers, which I will say, Minister of Economic Development, Rural Development and Tourism, when I asked him and suggested, I'll keep my questions short, you keep your answers short, worked very well. Now, I'm not sure many of my colleagues could say the same thing about some of the answers he got from that minister. They may disagree, but I can say that. But that's why well, true enough, the minister suggests there may have been long questions, which I tried to suggest to my colleagues in the opposition that long questions bring long answers, and wide open questions bring wide open answers. But to his credit, the Minister of Justice, I believe, may have only been 5 or 7 minutes in his opening statement, and then he shut his book and he said, all right, let's have some questions. And I'll give him credit for that. Because in the approximately, I'll say 35 minutes that I was able to ask him questions, I obtained more information than I would suggest some members have received from government ministers in 10 hours. I believe I had more information in that 35 minutes. And one of the biggest things I could have possibly asked for was one sheet that said exactly what cuts were being made to the Department of Justice. Reductions approved by Treasury Board, fiscal 2011-2012, that one sheet is the one that told me pretty much everything I needed to know. Unfortunately, I wish the Minister today, in tabling Bill number 35 and opening second debate on it, second reading, that he'd be able to give us a one-page and tell us how many incidents has there been of police coming into contact with criminals who are wearing body armor. Where are the regulations that say here's exactly how the registrar is going to be able to determine whether Nova Scotians can receive a permit for having body armor or not. None of that information is contained. And yet we're being told, and the Minister is very happy to say, this is about police safety. That makes it very difficult for anyone to argue against that. And certainly I would never want to be seen, or anyone be seen, as opposing that. But this is a legitimate question that's being asked by law-abiding Nova Scotians who are saying, well, hold on now. Do I really need to go and get a permit to purchase body armor to protect myself when I'm a law-abiding citizen? And what's the justification for that? It's a legitimate question. And it, again, as I mentioned earlier, it brings up the questions of, is the government playing Big Brother in this case? It's one thing to have the need to register your guns, which we clearly know guns can be very violent and can be used for illegal purposes and can put an end to a life. Body armor is a little bit different. It's actually meant to try to prevent you from losing your life and protecting you. So it's certainly different. And I believe from what the Minister indicated, there's only one other Canadian jurisdiction that currently has legislation limiting the use of body armor in Canada. One of the other issues that came up to light yesterday is when the Minister introduced the manager and the lawyer who would be part of the civil forfeiture unit for the province of Nova Scotia. Many of the government members would not have been here at the time, but in 2007 we passed legislation giving the government authority to set up a civil forfeiture unit in the province. They were given legislative authority by this House. Yesterday, the Minister of Justice told us, well, we didn't move on it right away because we wanted to see if the courts would uphold the legislation that was similar to what was passed in other jurisdictions. So then we found out of the Chatterjee decision in 2009 in Ontario, which upheld the legislation. So if I'm not mistaken, 2009 was 2 years ago. So what has this government, who tells us they're tough on crime, been doing for 2 years to set up this unit? Now, possibly, the Minister could say, well, we had to go outside and advertise to find a director and find a lawyer for this unit. It took a long time. We had to post a job. We had to do interviews, everything else. That's not the case. The manager who's going to manage it and the lawyer in question are Department of Justice employees. So there was no outside search. There was no competition. There was no lengthy interviews. It was done from internally. 2 years it took to set this up. The question is why, if a government is serious about crime, why would it take 2 years to put this in place? We realize that sometimes the wheels of government may move a little slowly, but if a government says this is a priority, legislation was passed in 2007, you've had 4 years to prepare for this, and yet after the courts uphold it, it takes you another 2 years to set up a two-person team. That doesn't send a message of a government that's tough on crime or that takes crime issues seriously. But we'll wait and see. And certainly, I was here when the legislation was passed in 2007. The Minister of Justice wasn't, but I was here. I was part of that debate, and I voted for that legislation. And we've waited 4 years. 4 years for it to be put in place. And how much longer will it take? Because yesterday was only an announcement. There's still work to be done in communicating this new unit, civil forfeiture unit, to police forces around the province and finding out exactly how it's going to work. And with a few of the questions I asked yesterday, there is still a bit of confusion as to how this will proceed. Yesterday in the questions, the Minister of Justice suggested that the minute that the police find goods that they believe was purchased through the profits of crime, that this unit can kick into place immediately. Which raises an interesting question, because if the police are there and they lay charges and that a criminal proceeding is going to take place, does it make sense for the civil forfeiture proceeding to take place at the same time? As a lawyer, I thought that would be bizarre, that you would have a civil proceeding taking place while you're still awaiting to see the outcome of a criminal trial. Yet that was the answer the minister provided. In talking with some of the lawyers afterwards, that didn't seem to be the case. Because the last thing you want to do is have a civil procedure that may somehow negatively impact the criminal proceedings taking place. So those are some of the details we're still waiting to see. Will they have to wait the result of the criminal trial, if there is going to be actual charges laid, to see whether the courts are going to order the forfeiture of these goods that were obtained through the proceeds of crime, or is it after that the courts may have determined no charges are going to be prosecuted, and therefore at that point this new civil forfeiture team could kick in? Those details still need to be worked out. So Nova Scotians today were saying, well, if someone caught tomorrow with illegal items that were through the proceeds of crime, is this unit going to be able to work on that immediately? That remains to be seen. The question yesterday was, is this going to have an impact immediately on crime in Nova Scotia? My answer was, I don't think so. Over time, we are all hopeful that it is going to discourage people from committing crime or people profiting from criminal activities here in this province. But for those who are going to bed in Dartmouth tonight, who are wondering, will this put an end to the shootings and to the stabbings and to some of the murders that have taken place? The answer is no. And for the Minister of Justice to suggest otherwise, I would believe is disingenuous. This is, as he has mentioned, one tool, another tool to be used. Bill number 35 as well is possibly another tool that's going to be used. I was wondering if under the list of exemptions that they would have included the 7 vests that were mistakenly sold by the government of Nova Scotia. I haven't seen it in the bill. Maybe it'll show up in the regulations. But that was embarrassing for Nova Scotians. I believe it was embarrassing for the Minister of Justice that he would send out a release about a bill to limit body armour only to find out through the press that it was actually the government of Nova Scotia that sold 7 units of body armour onto the streets of Nova Scotia. They were sold to a vendor, and my understanding is they were stolen from the vendor. So we have no idea whose hands they are in now. And only time will tell whether the minister will even advise us. If the police are successful in arresting someone who has the body armour that was mistakenly sold by the province of Nova Scotia, if you will say, we have 1, there's only 6 left to go. Or we have 2, there's only 5 left to go. Only time will tell, but certainly that is of great concern to Nova Scotians, that an issue so serious that the government somehow would have allowed these items to be sold. And I would have hoped that the Minister of Justice would have indicated, and as a reassurance to Nova Scotians, that a review is being done to ensure what exact items can be sold at public auction by Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, to make sure that we don't have this type of an embarrassing situation again, that we are not actually putting back on the street items that could be determined at the end to cause concern and possible harm to law enforcement officers in the province of Nova Scotia. So, Madam Speaker, I believe I've raised a few issues with Bill number 35 which were brought to my attention. I believe there is an opportunity here for the Minister of Justice to show us what the regulations are, answer some of the questions we have raised about how prevalent is it that police run into individuals who are wearing body armor? How often does it happen in our province? Show us the regulations as to exactly what criteria will be put in place for who will be permitted to get authorization to buy and possess body armor in this province. Those are legitimate questions by law-abiding Nova Scotians. I believe they deserve answers. I believe the Minister has the opportunity to provide us with those. To not do so, I believe, is disingenuous and certainly raises questions about just how serious this government is about crime in this province. Mr. Speaker, I do hope, Madam Speaker, I should say, I do hope that we are going to see some presentations at the Law Amendments Committee. I would, for those who are following, I would presume this bill won't be called before sometime next week. So I would hope that any interested Nova Scotians who have opinions can either communicate them directly to us or can even better yet come make a presentation to the Law Amendments Committee. They can contact the clerk's office for Legislative Council here in Nova Scotia and find out exactly when this bill is going to be called and how they can come make a presentation to express their concerns, whether in favor, not in favor, or, as I've done today, merely asking questions about the subject at hand. With that, Madam Speaker, I do look forward to the interventions of some of my other colleagues and do hope on closing that the Minister of Justice will hopefully commit to providing us with some of the information that I have requested during my brief remarks on Bill number 35. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member from Hants West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I want to take just a few minutes this afternoon to speak to Bill number 35 on a couple of concerns. I want to not going to repeat all that the honourable member from Richmond has done, but there was a lot of good points raised in his discussion here in this debate this afternoon. One's of interest, certainly the data on who and how many and so on and so forth. One of the things I noticed, though, he did touch on, interestingly enough, was consultation and other organizations or groups that may also fit into this other than the police departments, and there is one of them. Under Section 3 and Subsection 2, there's one that should be added there. And these people put their lives on the line every day in this province, and there have been many incidents over the years that I'm aware of. Personally, and that is the group of paramedics that work in this province, a very professional organization who are not represented in this section at all and should be, and I'll be putting forward an amendment to that very piece of the bill, Madam Speaker, very worthy of being on that list. I can tell you there are many stories from over the years, and I was involved nearly 20 years, and I know of an incident in Sackville years ago where a paramedic went to a door. It was Christmas Day of all days. The door opened and the gentleman who opened the door put a gun on the medic's chest. Luckily, the trigger jammed or he'd have been killed right there. Those are real stories of the streets in Nova Scotia, and that is so unfortunate. It's hard to believe that we're even debating the issues of crime that we're seeing in the last number of months and over the last few years, but it's not new. Unfortunately, we have these issues. It doesn't matter if it's guns, it's baseball bats, 2x4s, whatever it might be. It's the reality of the life that we're living in right now, and you know, we can count on, or I say we can count on, we'd like to be able to count on the justice system to clean up some of this issues and call it a mess, call it whatever you want that are out there. And I think that, you know, police departments around the province are certainly working hard to do what they can, but they need the tools in place to do it. And if this is a tool, great. They have many tools, and I know that they're working on a variety of things, probably lots of things that we're not even aware of, but it's important we continue to do that, and it's important that we try to figure out ways to deter crime. Instead, here we are putting in bills that are going to be out there to protect our people, you know, like police officers and a number of others that were mentioned there. And now, as I'm mentioning, paramedics. What a shame that we have to think about this very issue and our medics going into these situations and their lives being put at risk. But as I said, it is the reality. I know there are protocols in place when calls are coming in for responses to certain types of incidents that involve crime, questions are asked, and appropriately so, in our protocols that should determine whether or not scenes are safe to go in. But it only takes one, and there have been incidents where, medics do decide that they're going in, they feel comfortable, or misinformation has been given over the phone or whatever it might be. But a very, very important organization to be captured in this, and they should be fit into that subsection number 2. Or section 3, I guess, whatever it is there on the bill. They should be fit in there without any exception as far as I'm concerned, and as I said, I'll be putting an amendment forward to support that. I look forward to this getting to law amendments, I think, and I'm hopeful that there'll be a number of presenters that do come in, and perhaps we'll have somebody from the EHS or the paramedics themselves that will come in and speak to it in an effort to make it better, Madam Chair, I should say. With that, again, I just want to say in closing that there were a number of very good points raised by the member for Richmond, and I could easily stand here and repeat through the course of the next half hour all of those, but I won't do that. I know that we'll get on with the other business here of the day, but I do want to re-emphasize the support for those very comments and adding my own as well. So with that, Madam Speaker, thanks very much.
Thank you. If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Justice, it will be to close debate.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much, and I wish to thank my colleagues for their comments, and I'll take anything that they've said under consideration and reflect on that in my free moments of thought, and I appreciate that opportunity presented to me. And I move that this be sent over to the House. Thank you.
Thank you. The question is for second reading of Bill 35. Is the House ready for the question? All in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed nay. Motion is carried.
Bill number 35, an act respecting the control of body armour.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
That's all right. Acting, not a very good one apparently. Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill number 36, the Energy Efficiency Appliances Act.
Thank you. I now call Bill number 36. I now recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to move Bill number 36, the Energy Saving Roadway Lighting 2011 Act, is amending the Energy Efficiency Appliance Act, and I now move that it be read a second time. Madam Speaker, the purpose of this bill is to give government the ability to regulate the use of roadway lighting. Currently, it just regulates the purchase and sale of such lighting. This legislative change will enable regulations to be developed that will require the use of energy-efficient LED lights for all roadway lighting around the province and set an international standard for those lights. Madam Speaker, this will mean energy savings, reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and less mercury in the environment. I'm proud to say that this legislation will make Nova Scotia the first jurisdiction in North America to mandate the usage of LED streetlights from one end of the province to the other. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia is a leader in using green technology, and making the change to LED road lights just makes sense. Earlier this year, the province announced it was converting 2,500 lights to LED lights on Nova Scotia highways. And Madam Speaker, there are approximately 120,000 roadway lights in place throughout Nova Scotia, and the majority are owned by Nova Scotia Power, and with 10% belonging to the municipalities. Madam Speaker, we expect that converting to LED lights will result in an annual savings of more than 50%. And when combined with significantly reduced maintenance costs, that translates into an estimated annual saving of approximately $18 million. And in addition, Madam Speaker, converting to LED streetlights will reduce greenhouse gas emissions by more than 30,000 tons, and also save half a kilogram of mercury each year. Madam Speaker, the cost of converting to LED is estimated at approximately $100 million, but the final price will be determined through a competitive bidding process. Nova Scotia Power will apply to the Utility and Review Board to invest that capital, making the case that the conversion benefits municipal government ratepayers and that the savings offset the cost in the long term. Madam Speaker, Nova Scotia Power and the municipalities will have 5 years to complete the conversion. Municipalities will have the option to finance their conversion projects through the Municipal Finance Corporation, or they can choose to convert their systems through Nova Scotia Power. Some municipalities have already begun the conversion to LED lighting. Last year, 7 municipalities received funding through the ECA Nova Scotia Fund to begin converting their streetlights to LED lighting. And Madam Speaker, already they're seeing savings. Just as an example, in Amherst, Mayor Robert Small said they expect to save approximately $85,000 this year alone in energy and maintenance costs. And over the 20-year lifespan of the LED lights, they expect savings in excess of $2.3 million. And certainly that's good news for the taxpayers in that municipality. And Amherst is just one example. Madam Speaker, converting to LED lights on Nova Scotia roadways also has another significant benefit. It has the potential to create more jobs in Nova Scotia and to grow our economy. A Nova Scotia supplier of LED roadway lighting Limited in Amherst, designs and manufactures energy-efficient streetlights that are anticipated to be virtually maintenance-free for 20 years. LED Roadway Lighting Limited has gained a worldwide reputation for the quality of its products. They work with governments and utilities throughout North America and currently employ more than 100 people in the border town. They provided LED lighting products for Nova Scotia highways, and they will have the opportunity certainly to bid on the work that will result from this legislation. Madam Speaker, this could mean significant economic benefits to them and more jobs for Nova Scotians. So to be clear, Madam Speaker, we will set an international standard that could also be met by other suppliers. However, we are certainly hopeful that this Nova Scotia company will be a strong contender for the work given their successful international track record. So in closing, Madam Speaker, I'm very proud of this legislation. It has the potential to impact the lives of Nova Scotians in many ways, by saving energy costs, by significantly reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and by lowering the amount of mercury in our environment, and potentially by creating new jobs and growing the economy. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Minister of Energy shouldn't feel bad about the delayed applause, because it's been on all sides of the House today. There's been delayed applause for speakers. So, you know, Madam Speaker, I guess I support the idea of moving to LED roadway lighting for our streetlights, but I have a number of comments with respect to the bill. I'd like to start by the fact that the Premier went up to Amherst and stood in a factory in front of a number of workers and told them that his government would be legislating the requirement for LED roadway or LED lights for street lights in the coming days, and the bill doesn't even mention LED lights. In fact, all it does is the bill allows the cabinet, effectively, to legislate or require the use of any efficient lighting, and the cabinet gets to decide what that might be. And I know that we don't have any guarantee that that will be LED only, or that might be any one of a number of other technologies that are currently out there. That troubles me, because many people, including many of the workers I have since talked to, were surprised to find out that the legislation did not include what the Premier had promised at his press conference and his press briefing up at that factory. That's troubling. The government that's not to say the government is not taking an important step here by requiring this to happen, but they're not doing what they said they were doing to the workers who were here to listen to the Premier speak, and that I think we should all be concerned about that. clearly the government is intending to try and create a situation where LED roadway lighting is the preferred bidder on this, and that's not something I'm necessarily opposed to. They're a Nova Scotia company, a very good Nova Scotia company. They're, in fact, I know quite a lot about the history of that company, and they have worked with them for the better part of 7 years off and on in different capacities. And they are a company which is actually arguably the world leader in roadway lighting, LED roadway lighting in any case. However, I wonder what trouble this gets us in when the minister stands up and talks about having an open and transparent procurement process, and then talks about how wonderful one specific company is that might be bidding on this process. I would suggest that that could very well open the government to charges of by other bidders when this eventually comes out, that this was set up to support one company. And that would be a shame if all of a sudden a Nova Scotia company finds itself in the middle of a protracted legal battle over procurement rules because of statements by the government as this legislation has come forward. I believe that that is a company which has a superior product, certainly, and it's easier for me to say it because I'm on the opposition side and I'm not in a position to write the tender or so forth. And I think that they would easily compete both on price and product with any other company in the world. Much like my colleague from Richmond had talked about in the previous bill, where there are no regulations in front of us, there are again no regulations in front of us here, and really the details are in the regulations. So the government says that they're going to legislate LED lighting for roadways. They say they're going to do that within 5 years, I believe was the, or required to be in place within 5 years, I believe was the timeline. And yet neither of those items are in this bill. Neither one is in the 2 paragraphs of this bill. And in fact, what is in this bill is that lighting, I'll just quote one line, lighting meets a prescribed efficiency standard with respect to that lighting. Well, high pressure sodium lights meet the efficiency standard for high pressure sodium lights. Mercury vapor lights meet the efficiency standard for mercury vapor lights. This bill doesn't say that it will have to meet what that standard is. It doesn't preclude other types of lighting. If indeed it is the intent to require that LED be the only option, the bill doesn't actually do that. The bill doesn't provide the details on how this will be financed, and it's worth noting that the Premier was asked by the media about this here in the legislature, and then had to have the Deputy Minister of Energy correct the media after his press conference, or his scrum, because the Premier had said that the Utility and Review Board may have to look at how customers are charged and how individual ratepayers are charged for the lights, when in fact neither of those is accurate, because first of all, individual ratepayers in Nova Scotia don't pay for roadway lighting. Municipalities or the province does, or in some cases Nova Scotia Power owns them and they lease them back to municipalities in the province. There's a number of combinations. So you had to be corrected on how it's paid for. The second part that he neglected to mention is the Nova Scotia Power already actually has an application before the board that is being heard at the moment on their capital plan, which includes changing all their lights out to LED lighting. So that's actually already underway before this bill even comes forward. And I recognize they don't own all the lights to start with. And then the third thing he said was in talking about how they pay for, well, there's already a process in place in terms of how this is paid for. If you're paying, for the sake of argument, $27 to lease a light, you continue to pay, including the power charge, you continue paying the $27, and the energy savings cost is factored into the capital amortization of the light fixture itself. And that's already in place, and that's been approved by the board, and it seems to be working fairly well. And so, of course, the Deputy Minister of Energy had to go out and correct all those things afterwards. And that's fine, it got corrected, and it's not the end of the world, but it makes me concerned that the government may not even understand exactly what they're doing with the bill. because I think it is a good move. But the question, what happens with streetlights? A lot of streetlights around the legislature here have already been changed, in addition to the roadway lights, have been changed to LED fixtures. We know that because they've actually come with some of their own challenges where they actually don't heat up because they don't waste power in the form of heat from the lights. And so the snow doesn't always melt off them, and so you get street lights that are covered in snow. And I know there's a number of companies working on potential solutions to that, and a solution will be found. That's fine. It still saves energy, and there's a rate now in place for LED traffic lights. But you know that this bill could have easily covered those. And perhaps one of the most interesting things, I know the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal is sitting in the back listening intently, and the government just built a new interchange in the Sackville area. And so I took a drive-by on the weekend to see what lights they installed, what roadway lights they installed just a couple of weeks ago. Some of them I think have been in for, still under construction, not open. They're not LED. This is the government's own project, the government's own tender on a government highway project. And they're about to legislate LED roadway lighting, and they didn't put in LED lights on their own project. It makes no sense. So instead, I assume they're probably high pressure sodium, but they could be any number of technologies, but they're certainly not an energy efficient standard. The one thing I will give them credit for is that they are cutoff. They appear to be cutoff lights. And that would be the next issue that I would like to speak about, is that if we're talking about going to energy efficient roadway lights, why are we not also legislating the requirement that the new fix, because there are going to be new heads on all of these. You don't just go and change a bulb. Why are we not legislating that all the lights are cutoff fixtures? You know, when they built Dartmouth Crossing over here, it's one of the things the residents fought for. They said, listen, fine, you're doing this, but make sure that you put all the fixtures are cutoff lights. And there's an advantage in that. And what that does, of course, Madam Speaker, is that it prevents the light from shining upwards, where it's wasted anyways. So the light only shines where you need it. There's two advantages. One, it uses significantly less energy because you need less light. And the second issue is that you start meeting the dark sky conventions that people are increasingly, and in my view, rightly so concerned about, where you don't have those glows over metropolises and shopping areas and homes, and you can actually have the lighting, but you can keep the skies relatively dark, which is great for, you know, not only astronomers and people, but anybody that enjoys the outdoors and anybody that's concerned about light pollution issues. And there's actually a number of major there's work being done in the United Nations on that particular issue, and why wouldn't we legislate that? Now, I will say that it did appear that new interchange near Sackville does appear to be a cutoff style light, but it is not LED. It is not energy efficient. They aren't even turned on yet. And here's the government legislating a requirement that everybody else go out and use LED roadway lightings, and they don't even do it on their own project. It makes absolutely no sense. So the final issue that I wanted to address with respect to this bill is having the information to municipalities. Now, the Premier said the other day, he talked about how he was asked in question period by members of the Progressive Conservative caucus about the issue of whether they were consulted. Now, I'm not sure what direct consultation went on, but I do know that when the Premier said that UNSM had requested this, that is true. I believe it's even on their own website that they had actually requested this some years ago. So that is true, and they've been the ones that have actually pushed this, and a number of municipalities such as Amherst and HRM and some others have already put in a lot of these lights. And in fact, right in front of the legislature here, there's a whole street of LED lights. But I am concerned that in advance of doing this, the government staff or somebody hasn't gone out and said, listen, you need to understand what the rollout period would be, how this would be financed, all those sorts of things. That doesn't appear to have happened. And so as a result, you have some municipalities that haven't moved ahead with energy efficient lighting already. don't understand, and they're looking and they're very concerned about the costs. Now, it's wrong for the Minister and the Premier to say that this is going to lead to short-term savings, because it won't, because it won't be more expensive, or shouldn't be more expensive. The savings should cover your capital costs. But long-term, it provides clear environmental benefits. There's demand. I mean, lighting is a huge cost in this province and a huge driver of demand. So there are benefits. And from a municipality's point of view, or the province, or it shouldn't cost more money. It shouldn't cost more money, but I think that the smaller ones in particular who are concerned about this, information should have been provided them, and in speaking to some of them in the past few days, they still don't feel that they've been provided any information on this other than the review board will make a determination. Well, the review board doesn't have to make a determination on this because it's already been done. And there's a very strong precedent. And so I'm concerned that on something that can potentially be very good, what's happened is that, you know, there's a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of confusion about it. And of course, we get back to the fact that the government has advertised it as a bill that does one thing when in fact that's not what the bill does at all. And this is the second bill this session from the Department of Energy that does that, because the renewable energy one, where a press release went out saying that the bill would, or that they were introducing legislation to increase the renewable energy targets to 40%, and 40% wasn't even in the bill, and then had to change that and go back and say, well, actually, we're going to do that in regulations later when it could actually already be done in regulations. This is the same thing happening again from the Department of Energy. Is advertised as a bill that legislates LED lighting, and if you, Burnside News this week had an article today quoting the Premier talking about how they've introduced a bill that will guarantee LED lighting on roads, but the bill doesn't do that. The bill doesn't even mention LED lighting. And so if you're going to introduce a bill that and say it does something, then make sure the bill does that. Because at this point, you know, we can pass this bill, and we interestingly enough, we support what the Premier says the bill would do. We're concerned that the bill doesn't do what the Premier said it does. And I challenge any member of this House to tell me where in this bill it says LED or light emitting diode or any such thing. It just says that basically cabinet can determine what kind of lighting is on a road. Well, great, but what guarantee do we have that that's the technology they're going to go with? And you know, should they potentially open it to other technologies as well? So, Madam Speaker, I think that you know, the intent of the government here is good. What the government stated objectives are good. I don't disagree with anything the Minister of Energy said in his statement and his remarks. I completely agree with all that. What I'm concerned about is, I guess the one thing I do disagree with is that the bill doesn't actually do that. But I think in his statement he actually said that that will come in regulations. But that wasn't how it was initially advertised, and that's not what Nova Scotians think the bill is that we're debating right now. It's perhaps the government will bring forward amendments before we hit the end to actually, if they want to make it LED, let's make it LED. I hope they will also address the issue of the type of fixtures, the cutoff fixtures, and I hope that the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal, before they turn the lights on in the new interchange, will go down and get the heads changed and make them LED, because it actually drives me nuts that we're passing a bill here on this and the province is building an interchange and putting in new lights that aren't LED. It just, I don't, it's just really weird. So, Madam Speaker, we certainly support this moving forward. We certainly support the idea of it. We think it does make sense. I think some of the criticisms, I think the municipalities could have had more consultation, but I agree that they had asked for this. In fact, and I think, Madam Speaker, you may still have been on council at that time when the municipalities were starting to ask for this stuff. And it is important. It will save money. It's good for the environment. And we all know lighting is a major driver of demand for electricity in the province. And so this obviously can have a significant change. But I really think some more information's got to get out to the municipalities and other groups that use this. And I also really strongly feel that I would like to see the government move to a point where the bills do what they say they're going to do and not that they're just suggesting it'll happen in regulations at some point in the future, because we've seen so many times that regulations have actually changed the stated intent of a bill, and so I think that becomes increasingly of concern. So thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker, and it gives me a pleasure to stand and talk about Bill 36, energy efficient appliances. I listened to my colleague from Dartmouth North, and there's a lot of what he has to say is interesting, I'm sure, but one of the things that it is and important to know that I think this is a valuable move and trying to do this type of lighting. And the fact that the municipalities are interested in making this happen is good. I guess one of the things that we would question on this side of the house is maybe for municipalities that may see this as a financial hardship, Madam Speaker, it might be an opportunity as these lights wear out, that they get replaced on a basis as if the light wears out, you put a new light in place, and that way it's a little more efficient. You're getting the full life out of the product that's there now, instead of tearing down some things that are still perfectly good and putting them aside. And you'll probably give you more time to work up a viable plan for looking after the mercury and how do you store the mercury that comes out of these new lights that are being put in place and replacing mercury vapor lights and other lights that are in the system. The overall goal of making our street lighting system more energy efficient is one that I think everybody in this house would support. And knowing that we have in this province a leader in the production of such lighting is something that we should take a great deal of pride in, and hopefully they will be able to take their knowledge of the industry and help share that around Nova Scotia, and Nova Scotians will get some good job opportunities doing and building these lights so that they work on the streets and the roadways of the province of Nova Scotia. So with those few comments, Madam Speaker, I'm going to take my seat and we will be voting in favour of moving this forward. Thank you.
Thank you. If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Energy, it will be to close debate.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I want to thank the honourable members opposite for their kind words and comments and interventions and general support for the bill. And with that, briefly, I just want to close debate and move that we have second reading here on Bill 36.
Thank you. The question is for second reading of Bill number 36. Is the House ready for the question?
Question.
All in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 36, an act to amend Chapter 2 of the Acts of 1991, the Energy Efficient Appliances Act.
Thank you. Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, could you please call Bill number 40, the Liquor Control Act?
I now call Bill number 40. I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I move that Bill 40 be now read a second time. Madam Speaker, these amendments to the Liquor Control Act that will make it easier for businesses in Nova Scotia to apply for a liquor license. Our stakeholders feel strongly that the process of applying for a liquor license in particular is too complicated, too time-consuming, and too costly. These new amendments to the Liquor Control Act will streamline the application process, making it easier and less expensive for both businesses and government. These amendments would transfer the responsibility of granting permanent liquor licenses from the Utility and Review Board to the Alcohol and Gaming Division of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations. The Alcohol and Gaming Division will be the first level of appeal for issues dealing with licensing and enforcement. Many of the Utility and Review Board's decisions can be dealt with through informal hearings, but the Liquor Control Act requires a public hearing for many initial license applications, whether or not anyone opposes the application, Madam Speaker. So right now, if you're applying for a permanent liquor license, the UARB advertises a notice of hearing, travels to the community, and conducts a hearing, even if no one attends or objects to the license. This new change will replace the need for expensive and time-consuming public hearings with a system of public feedback where people can have their objections heard before a license is granted. The Alcohol and Gaming Division will remain responsible for the inspection of licensed premises. These new changes will streamline the application process, remove duplication, and modernize the overall system. It will also save money for both businesses and for the government, which is crucial at a time when we're getting back to balance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I look forward to any interventions by the member's office.
The honourable member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Just a few remarks regarding this Bill 40. The amendments in this bill will save government an estimated $225,000 a year, according to the government press release. In any case, so it must be accurate. And will also save industry money while not compromising the enforcement. And again, we generally support this bill. There are a few things we'd like to see clarified in the bill when it moves along to law amendments and perhaps to committee of the whole House. But the change is definitely transferring responsibility for granting permanent liquor licenses from the UARB to the Alcohol and Gaming Division. And Mr. Speaker, there was nothing more frustrating in the past than having these hearings set up for liquor licenses, and people would come and talk to you about it, and they had to go through this elaborate procedure when they would get to the UARB or to whatever the regulatory body was at the time, and they'd have to hire people to go there, and they'd have to get lawyers, and they'd have to present evidence as to why they should get a license. And in some cases, even though there was nobody there to object to them getting a license, they had to go through this long and somewhat expensive process. So I think by getting rid of that process, it's a good thing, Mr. Speaker. And I believe that that's a step in the right direction. You know, we are moving along in this particular decade where let's some of the events or the business requirements in the past just are not relevant anymore, and literally don't work. And the easier we can make the regulatory process for people trying to set up a business in Nova Scotia, the better it will be for everybody. However, I do have a concern about the fact that the government's not passing the 225 along to people who are going to get licenses or set up small business, and it would be a help to them perhaps to reduce the license fee. So I'd hope that the minister might give some consideration to where that windfall will ultimately end up. You know, but having said that, Mr. Speaker, we generally favour this particular bill, and it cuts back on red tape, and I believe that the government is moving in the right direction here. We don't need these elaborate hearings. We don't need these judgments that are being made on people, for very expensive judgments in some cases, to whether or not they should have a liquor license. You know, we've reached a stage in this province where I think we should be encouraging business at every step of the way in this province. So we generally support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's interesting to see how a culture in a province changes over time. I know that in this day and age, the consumption of alcohol, if it's done in a responsible way, is looked at as more reasonable behavior. I know years ago it was often considered something to be hidden away, and sometimes I wonder, Mr. Speaker, if that actually helped our patterns of consumption in this province. And I think about other places I visited, like I've been to Japan, and you can actually buy a beer out of a vending machine in broad daylight in Japan. You can crack it open and drink it on the street. And you can't do that here. But again, it just shows how the culture in this province evolves. It's been evolving. But it's interesting to note, if you look at other places in the world, how sometimes they're more free about these kinds of things. And if the people are responsible, I don't see anything wrong with that, Mr. Speaker. I know I think there's only one state left in the U.S. that allows this now, but you can actually have a beverage while you're traveling in your car, as long as you're not driving, of course. So, you know, it's just interesting, and I make that comment that culture changes, and I think what we're seeing with this legislation is we're trying to make it a little more user-friendly for the people who need liquor licenses to be able to get them, and we commend the government for that. And I hope that our culture in this province continues to evolve. albeit in a responsible way, Mr. Speaker, because if people are being responsible, then I think that they deserve the freedom that goes along with that responsibility. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, it will be to close debate on Bill number 40, the Liquor Control Act. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the comments by the members opposite. The member for Cape Breton South, I asked the very same question, actually it still costs us so much more. That's the reason that fee isn't getting handed on to the licensees or applicants. But I would like to say that whatever opportunity we are able to drop those fees, we would look for it. So I thank the members for their support to this point, and I'm closing debate on this bill and move second reading of Bill 40, Mr. Speaker.
The question is for second reading of Bill 40, the Liquor Control Act. Is the House ready for the question? All those in favour? Those opposed? Carried.
Bill number 40, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 260 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Liquor Control Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 41, Dangerous and Unsightly Premises Amendment 2011 Act.
Bill number 41, Dangerous and Unsightly Premises Amendment 2011 Act. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move Bill 41 be now read a second time. These amendments to the HRM Charter and the Municipal Government Act will help municipalities deal with dangerous and unsightly properties. Unsightly properties are a major concern for municipalities, Mr. Speaker. They don't just make our communities look ugly, they can attract crime, they make people feel unsafe, affect how visitors see our hometowns and how we see ourselves. These properties can also be dangerous for children and anyone passing by. Municipalities want to have every tool possible at their disposal to deal with these properties, and Mr. Speaker, this government is happy to help. People can sometimes stockpile collections of things, cars, recyclables, newspapers that can make their properties unsightly, unhealthy, or dangerous. The Municipal Government Act and the HRM Charter currently do not give municipalities the power to cite the full range of these properties as dangerous and unsightly. Mr. Speaker, these amendments will allow municipalities to do that. They will also ensure that the minimum fines handed out by municipalities can't be reduced by the courts for a property other than a person's home. Mr. Speaker, it's not uncommon for municipalities to take the owners of dangerous and unsightly premises to court, and when they do, it is for a serious matter, and this has been a concern for some municipalities in the past, and we want to ensure that the property owners understand that municipalities mean business, particularly when dealing with dangerous and unsightly premises. These amendments will also ensure that the staff members responsible for enforcing unsightly premises provisions report back regularly to Council on their progress. And this will mean that municipal councils and the public will be well aware of the progress being made on unsightly premises orders in their communities. So, Mr. Speaker, with that, I look forward to any comments by members of the opposition on Bill 41.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. On behalf of our critic for Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, I'm pleased to say a few words on Bill number 41. As well, Mr. Speaker, I can say that my own municipality of Richmond has been tackling this issue, as many other municipalities have, for quite a few years, and I certainly do want to take this opportunity to publicly commend them for actions that they have taken in the last 6 months or so of actually taking action on a number of properties. The challenge has always been for municipalities is, did they have the legal authority to go in and force a cleanup of properties? It's something that I know they're very reluctant to do. They always do their best through, I know in our case, the Planning Commission, to have the property owner take action to address the concerns that have been raised. But unfortunately, in some cases, there really is no choice. It's either by a lack of will, a lack of the financial resources, a lack of wanting to let go of what's been accumulated, that municipalities are forced to go in and to make the necessary cleanup of these properties. But Speaker, throughout Nova Scotia, I believe we are a province, and many visitors have told me, as I'm sure they've told the Minister, that Nova Scotians really take care of their property. They take great pride in their home. They take great pride in what their yard looks like, and it's something that they spend a great deal of effort in maintaining. And there's nothing more that ruins in a community or ruins a street when you have one individual who decides that they are going to start collecting old cars, start collecting building materials, start collecting a whole host of items which are unsightly, which in many cases are dangerous, and certainly put a black mark on the entire community, especially all those property owners who work so hard to maintain the look of their properties and the look of their homes. But Mr. Speaker, I think it's important as well that we find a way of recognizing, and I had the opportunity to meet with a few individuals that the municipality was pursuing, and I believe an A&E special that you see on TV has brought light to an important issue that falls into these unsightly premises, and that's the issue of hoarding. The fact is that you have individuals who have the problem that has been commonly referred to as hoarding, and that they don't know how to refuse items. They continue to collect items. They're not quite sure what they're going to do with it, but they don't want to let it go. I've had an opportunity, and I remember one individual who came in my office, and I was listening to him rhyme off the stuff he had accumulated. And I immediately thought of that show because I said if they brought their cameras, they could almost do one of their episodes on this individual. Because at the end of the day, looking back at the 30 or so plus years that he had been accumulating stuff, he really didn't know why he was doing it. And looking back, he still wasn't sure why he had done it, but what he did know is he didn't want to let any of it go. And when you're looking at the individual, you can tell that there's some attachment with what we would call junk for this individual. And so there needs to be, I believe, a recognition as well, and I'm not sure what can be done, but it is a disorder. And many people, in this case, that individual started off collecting cars for parts as a side dollar. That's why he started doing it. For him, it was supplementing his family's income. But it just kept growing in that people started dropping off old hot water heaters. Then they started dropping off old oil tanks. Then all of a sudden a camper showed up on the property. Then all of a sudden Winnebago showed up on the property. And it was the place that people who didn't know how to dispose of their goods went to. They went and just dropped them off at this individual's property. And over time he collected all these goods, and now he's to the point that he doesn't know what to do with it anymore. Some items he's prepared to get rid of. Nobody really wants it, that's the problem. Old tires, for example, who wants old tires? And you can't burn them anymore. That's certainly not an option. You can't bury them. So he has attempted to try to address some of those issues, but I won't go into all the other details, but it just amazed me that people allow not only their properties, but in some cases, even their homes to become overwhelmed with these items that they've collected over the years. And it just boggles the mind that whole rooms, and if you've seen the show Hoarders, the conditions people allow themselves to live in. And in the case, in some of the situations that I've seen in my own county, that is the case. There are people who have just, for most of them are of low income, and they've just collected these items hoping to sell it for scrap metal or keep a few parts if people needed to fix their vehicle, that they would have some spare parts, and that it was done more for economic reasons. But in this day and age, for environmental concerns, for safety concerns, and for aesthetic concerns, it's not acceptable anymore. You can't just continue to collect junk around your property and expect that people are not going to complain. I would hope that with these changes that the Department of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations will work with municipalities, especially some of the smaller ones, and try to figure out a template approach that they can all use, rather than leave it to each municipality to try to figure out what their new powers are. There has to be an easier way of doing it, because small municipalities have enough burden on what they're trying to do with limited tax revenue. I would hope that rather than having each one of them trying to figure out what this means, that the department will be there working with them and possibly putting out a template that each one of them can use moving forward when it comes to dealing with dangerous and unsightly premises. So I do hope the minister will take that into consideration, because I know now that and I'm sure the minister's probably aware, each municipality is probably following different rules and following different approaches to deal with dangerous and unsightly premises. And that's unfortunate, because they're small units and there's no reason why we don't have a province-wide approach. Because in many cases, as I indicated before, and I'm sure the minister's aware, municipalities are concerned about their legal rights in enforcing going in on someone's property, bringing in, whether it be a bulldozer or an excavator, tearing down buildings, hauling stuff away. It's a significant action, and unfortunately in many cases I think municipalities have been reluctant to do it for fear of legal repercussions for taking this action. So at the end of the day, I'm sure the minister will agree that all municipalities should continue to encourage property owners to deal with these matters on their own, but if they're not going to do so, it's just no longer acceptable to allow a few continue to have unsightly premises when we as a province continue to promote tourism. We continue to promote what a wonderful lifestyle we have here and what a great place it is to live. For 99.9% of every community in Nova Scotia, that is the reality, but there is still that small percentage that continue to have dangerous, unsightly premises. We don't only have to deal with the ones we have now. I think the minister also needs to work on finding ways of preventing new ones from cropping up. And I'm not sure this bill will actually prevent any new ones. This seems to be dealing with those who already have unsightly premises, but we may want to also look at the fact of, is there a way for us to put some sort of a bylaw or some sort of an act that would give penalties to people who do start up from here forward unsightly or dangerous premises on their properties, so that we send a clear message that this is no longer acceptable, whether it's for economic reasons, whether it's for the disorder of hoarding. It's unacceptable in the province of Nova Scotia. I remember, for example, on the topic, Mr. Speaker, when Frank McKenna was first elected Premier of New Brunswick, I believe in the first year they started a program to get rid of derelict vehicles. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was either 25,000 vehicles or even more that they collected in 1 year. And as he said, it was a tradition in New Brunswick, especially amongst farmers, that when the car didn't work anymore, you just pushed it behind a barn. And it stayed behind a barn. But after a while, you suddenly had 4, 5, 6 or more cars behind a barn. And this was happening around the province. And just in 1 year, it was amazing the amount of vehicles they were able to pick up from properties and be able to recycle. And I know we've done the same thing here in our province, and it's a great program, and one that for many of these unsightly premises, cars are the problem. Cars or trucks or Winnebagos or campers, they tend to be on wheels, or at one point had wheels, I should say, because many of them no longer have them. But we have to do whatever we can to continue to encourage Nova Scotians to recycle old vehicles, not leave them on their properties, not have them up on blocks, not have flower pots growing out of them. It's something that's just not acceptable. So hopefully this is one more tool that is going to allow municipalities to deal with the problem, but I still think that we need to find ways as a province of sending out the clear message that it is unacceptable for anyone from here forward to be having dangerous, unsightly goods on their premises here in Nova Scotia. So I look forward to hearing some of the discussion on this bill, and certainly any changes being proposed at law amendments. But I again certainly want to recognize Warden John Boudreau, CAO Warren Olson, and all the councillors in Richmond for having taken the bold step of dealing with this. I'm sure, unfortunately, there'll be many more properties that need to be addressed, but if this is going to assist them in their efforts, it's certainly something that has my full support, and I'm sure would be fully supported by Richmond Municipal Council as well. So I thank the Minister for bringing this forward and appreciate the opportunity to make a few comments on Bill number 41. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Inverness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I've always been fascinated by old things, and I think of the show American Pickers or Canadian Pickers, and you see situations where people have stockpiled all kinds of things that would be useless to most people, but it's very interesting to me that people do that, and it's kind of a neat way, I suppose, to find things that are part of our past. But I think there comes a point, too, where we have to balance that with the need to keep properties in good condition. And I know it causes a lot of people frustration. You know, we think about our tourism industry, people seeing things like that. I know most people would not really be interested in seeing some of the things that the honourable member from Richmond has just spoken about. I think of one particular issue or situation where there's about 6 to 10 cars in the yard at any one time, and apparently there's a way that that landowners can sometimes, or property owners can sometimes get by some of the rules of unsightly property. If they have cars in their yard, if they slap a for sale sign on the car, sometimes they can avoid having to remove the car from their property. I don't know if that's true, but it's actually, this just came from a good source. So, and sometimes you have cars that don't even have engines in them, that somebody slapped a for sale sign on it to be able to keep that car on their property for whatever reason. So, and in one particular case, I think there's actually even some provincial property involved, because this person has about 60 feet of property, but they've got cars and junk over a property of about size 300 feet, and the property that borders this is provincial property, so it's being encroached upon. So I raise that for the Minister for his interest. And so we are supportive of this measure because we see it as a way to give municipalities greater ability to address issues of unsightly property, and we know that that will be appreciated, Mr. Speaker, by most Nova Scotians. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and pleased today to rise on this issue and to speak in support of the bill, because I think all of us here as MLAs, or many of us, especially in rural Nova Scotia, get calls on unsightly premises. And in fact, just a few moments ago, I was checking my BlackBerry, and what's at the top of my list today, but a premises on the Rayfuse Road in Kings County that was burnt out. The basement of it has been flooded for some time, and it poses a safety hazard. And again, the inability sometimes for the county to move quickly to deal with these premises is in fact all too common. So if this legislation is going to enable Kings County to be able to deal with the issue of unsightly premises and the gathering of tremendous amounts of materials that are picked up and placed on the premises and indeed are unsightly and unsafe in many occasions. So I know that the new warden of Kings County, Diana Brothers, is concerned about this issue. She's had a lot of calls in her first months in office, and as she has received as a councillor, and it's an area where she really wants to make a difference in this part of Nova Scotia. So I'm hopeful that it will move through the House fairly quickly. But as with all legislation, we know that proclamation and putting it into force is equally important as well. I've actually had one case in the past year where a family, after frustratingly working on getting a backyard collection of small equipment as well as vehicles, and working on these sometimes late into the night, Then you're dealing, of course, with the noise bylaw that is enforced, pretty strictly, but again doesn't deal with the issue that people have around the collection of old cars, old vehicles, working on them late at night. And this couple, who are now retired, decided that after trying to get some action taking, to actually decided to move. And it was one of those times when I felt as an MLA and through the work of my office that we had turned a lot of stones, but just weren't successful in getting these premises cleaned up. So I hope this legislation really does have that kind of teeth and ability to be able to make a difference in our community, because sometimes it is difficult to present, an absolutely convincing argument to the Department of Health that there's actually health hazards involved. Now, I have had a couple of occasions where premises that were serving food that burnt down, and again, in the heat of summer, they decided that they had better clean up the location and get rid of any possible health hazards that may be associated with the unsightly premise. So I just wanted to offer those few comments, and again encourage all of us here in the House to move this piece of legislation forward and see how quickly it can make a difference in our communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just want to take a few minutes today as well to speak to this bill. I think it's kind of important that we have all the tools that are necessary to help municipal council. I sat on council for a couple of years prior to being elected to this House, and I can tell you there were numerous issues that needed to be dealt with, and if this helps clean up some of the messes that are out there, that would be great and puts a little more power in the hands of mayors and councils, municipalities in general, and their administration to help look after. But at the same time, I want to say that I hope there's a common sense approach, I guess is one easy way of putting it. Not every yard is an unsightly mess. There sometimes can be some disarray around, but I heard the member from Kings West talking about people working in their cars or their garages or something at night. I don't know how that really relates. I guess maybe if there's a whole yard full of old tires or car parts or something around, but I would like to think that the tool is advantageous, but at the same time, as I said, Mr. Speaker, the common sense approach. I know you can't write all of the common sense that you'd like to write into a bill, or any law or policy for that matter, but and I'm not sure how it will be enforced, if it's going to be through their typical bylaw officers or just how that will go, but at the same time, it's important that we just don't start knocking on every door saying we're going to clean it up and sending them a bill or adding it to their taxes or what have you, however that may go. So, but in general, though, I think, as I said early on, this is a good approach to helping those struggling municipal units. As I said, I was part of one, and it was very difficult. There were a lot of hoops to jump through, and if this strengthens that, so be it, and that's great. With that, few comments, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
I am to recognize the Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. It will be to close debate on Bill 41, Dangerous and Unsightly Premises Amendment Act 2011. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank all the members for their interventions, and certainly for the member from Richmond. There are kind of liaison, I won't say officers, but staff from Service Nova Scotia Municipal Relations who have a particular area of the province it's kind of their jurisdiction to work with the municipal units there. So I'm sure they would be more than willing to kind of help municipalities through this. And this is really was to give a little more options, I guess, to municipalities. Whether they choose to write the bylaw or not, it'll have to be up to them. But I take his comments that it'd be nice if it wasn't kind of a patchwork around the province. But that's a little bit difficult for the government to demand. I think you know they've asked for this power, and we expect that they'll use it probably and consider what their neighbor municipality, how they might be applying it. And but we have people who can kind of help them through that. So I thank the members for their interventions, and I close debate on Bill 41 and move second reading, Mr. Speaker.
The question is for second reading of Bill 41. Is the host ready for the question? All those in favour? Aye. Those opposed? Carried.
Bill number 41, an act to strengthen municipal restrictions on dangerous and unsightly premises.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill 42, Halifax Regional Municipality Charter and Municipal Government Act?
Bill number 42, Halifax Regional Municipal Charter and Municipal Government Act. I will now recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia, Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to stand to move that Bill 42 be now read a second time.
If I recognize the Honourable Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations, it will be to close debate.
Second reading of Bill 42, Mr. Speaker.
The question is for second reading of Bill 42, Halifax Regional Municipality Charter and Municipal Government Act. Is the host ready for the question? All those in favour? Aye. Those opposed? Carried.
Bill number 42, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 39 of the Acts of 2008, the Halifax Regional Municipality Charter, and Chapter 18 of the Acts of 1998, the Municipal Government Act.
Order that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you please call Bill number 43, the Interior Designers Act?
Bill number 43, the Interior Designers Act. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Justice, I move Bill number 43, the Interior Designers Act. This be now read a second time.
If I am to recognize the Minister, it will be to close debate on Bill number 43.
Mr. Speaker, I move now second reading of the Interior Designs Act, Bill number 43.
The question is for second reading of Bill number 43, the Interior Design Act, I'm sorry. Is the host ready for the question? All those in favour? Aye. Those opposed? Carried.
Bill number 43, an act to amend Chapter 6 of the Acts of 2003, the Interior Designers Act.
Ordered that the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. I will now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I call Bill number 47, the Summary Proceedings Act.
Bill number 47, the Summary Proceedings Act. I now recognize the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
I move that Bill 47, the Summary Proceedings Act, be now read for a second time.
The Honourable Member for Richmond.
Thank you, Speaker. It's a pleasure to rise and speak on Bill number 47, Summary Proceedings Act. Speaker, it's my understanding that this is another effort to try to make it easier for Nova Scotians to be able to pay fines that they're faced with in Nova Scotia.